Sean Paul Reyes, aka Long Island Audit, was recently arrested not once, but twice for recording police in public areas of police stations in New York City. Let's take a look at what happened and get a better idea of who's right, who's wrong, and whose side the law is actually on.
Hopefully you all can hear me and see me okay. Coming to you live from New York City. Can't tell you exactly where yet. Let me know if you can hear me and see me perfectly. Let me know in the chat. Unfortunately, in a few minutes, I am probably going to be arrested by the NYPD, which is very unfortunate. Let's hope that that does not happen. So I wanted to speak to you guys. It's very important, right? Right here I have a law that was passed in the state of New York. I got it nicely laminated and everything for you guys. This law is a law that protects our civil rights. So we all know that we have a United States constitutionally protected right under the First Amendment of freedom of press. But we also, here in New York, have a law that specifically states we have the right to record law enforcement related activities.
All right, so here's where I wanted to jump in for the first time. From a federal perspective, there's not a ton of solid Supreme Court precedent on recording the police specifically, but you generally are considered to be able to record any official in the course of their duties. And this comes from a bunch of district court, or circuit court rather, the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th Circuit Court of Appeals have all recognized a First Amendment right to record police personnel carrying out their official duties in public places. Interestingly, the 2nd Circuit, which covers New York, has not had any solid case law on this, which may be part of the reason that you're seeing some of these interactions coming out of New York that you are. However, as Mr. Reyes pointed out, New York passed back in 2020 what they call the Right to Record Act, and that act explicitly allows anyone to record the police in the course of their duties. Under Section B of the Right to Record Police Activities section of the Right to Record Act, it states, person may record police activities and maintain custody and control of any such recording and of any property or instruments used in such recording. So basically, you're allowed to record the police and you're allowed to maintain custody of your camera, phone, whatever you're using to do that recording. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to permit a person to engage in actions that physically interfere with an official or lawful police function, or to prevent the seizure of any property or instruments used in a recording of police activities where the seizure is otherwise authorized by law. So basically, if you're arrested for a legitimate reason, they can take the camera that you are using. They can't delete the recording or do anything with it, but they can confiscate it if you are arrested for a lawful reason. But this would appear to give Mr. Reyes and anybody else trying to record the New York Police Department in public places the ability to record and maintain control of those recordings.
There is no exemption made for law enforcement officer precincts or lobbies. In fact, the New York City law, the Right to Record Act, was specifically written to undermine the policy by the NYPD's precinct. Specifically written to undermine that policy, right? So we are specifically, that law was specifically written in order to void the policy of the NYPD. That policy by the NYPD was implemented in 2018. The Right to Record Act was written in 2020, ladies and gentlemen. So, but the NYPD doesn't care that they are in violation of their own law, of the law that is governed in their jurisdiction, in the state and in the city. So that's my point, ladies and gentlemen, is that we cannot allow them to not only violate our constitutional rights and our First Amendment rights, but they are acting as a rogue agency inside of the city of New York, violating the law. How do I know that the law, the Right to Record Act, was written in order to overturn the policy of the NYPD? How do I know that? Because the author of the law, former city councilman Jermaine Williams, now he's the public advocate, which I hope next time we come here to the NYPD precinct, I hope he comes with me. I think that would make a great statement. But he wrote the Right to Record Act, ladies and gentlemen, in order to abolish the NYPD's policy and make that unlawful, which it is currently unlawful to this day. But the NYPD doesn't care. Right now, there are federal lawsuits pending saying that the NYPD is violating its own law. So I want you guys to understand that. This is the law right here. The New York Police Department is in violation of the law of New York City and New York State, and they don't care because there are no consequences, ladies and gentlemen. There are no consequences to their actions. So we're gonna make sure that there are consequences. We're gonna hold them accountable here. Hey, can you just make sure that I'm here with the photographer to make sure that everything's okay? Scalzo photo. Hey, can you just make sure that this is locked up in the car?
Yes.
All right, because I'm going to be heading out right now. So we're going to be going, ladies and gentlemen, let's take our walk over into the precinct. We're going to show the law enforcement officers, the law. The statute is New York Civil Rights Law 78-P. That's the state law. And then there's also a city law that protects us, that gives us the right to film in police precincts. That's what I don't understand, ladies and gentlemen. Did you make sure that that everything was locked?
Yes.
You just did?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what gives us the right to record. So people talk about the United States Constitution. That's the most important, right? They took an oath to uphold the United States Constitution. But there are two laws here in the state of New York that protect our rights also, that the NYPD is in direct violation of. How can a law enforcement officer, a law enforcement agency, be in violation of the law here in this district, and then the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office is going to prosecute that law, prosecute the crime? They're making it a crime. It says here, the right to record law enforcement related activities. A person not under arrest or in the custody of law enforcement official has the right to record law enforcement activity and to maintain custody and control of that recording and any property or instruments used by that person to record law enforcement. So not only are we allowed to record law enforcement, they're not allowed to even take our camera.
Okay, so that's exactly the law that I thought he was talking about earlier. That is the New York City Right to Record Act. And the part he does leave out there is they can take the camera if you're arrested for something else, right? But generally speaking, they would not be allowed to. And if he was recording police, say, here in the street, they would have absolutely no way of protecting themselves under that NYC Right to Record Act if they were to try to do something like take his camera, any of those kinds of things.
In our recordings, the law. Everybody who supports the police, right, blindly supports the police and thinks of them as heroes. You supposedly believe in law and order, correct? This is the law. So we're going to show that to the law enforcement officers. Let's hope that they don't violate our rights here today. Because that's where we're heading right now, ladies and gentlemen, live. Make sure you hit the like button. You can start seeing the NYPD cars behind me. Let me turn the camera around. Make sure you hit the like button, comment on this video, and subscribe. Because I don't think I'm going to have my freedom. Shortly, I won't have my freedom, which is unfortunate. All right, we're at the 75th precinct here, guys. We're going in together.
You guys usually sign a book?
We just get the sign, go to sign.
We're going in together.
All right, so at this point, it looks like they've entered the police precinct. There was no signage on the outside doors indicating that this was not open to the public, anything like that, which would mean this part of the lobby would be open to the public. It does appear that the door that this female officer is holding onto says something to the effect of no authorized personnel beyond this point. Obviously, if he were to enter into that portion, that would no longer be considered public. But this lobby is generally considered public since it is a public building, right? In that it is a building owned by the city of New York or leased by the city of New York in order to be a police precinct. That, since police are public officials, would make this a public building, at least this portion of the building. So far, based on the reading of that New York Right to Record Act and all of the other Court of Appeals type precedent, we should have the ability to record up to this point, but let's see what happens.
Sign it so they can read it.
We're going to affect change together, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, you can't be recorded in here.
Hi, ma'am.
Okay, so at this point, this officer has noticed that he's recording. There's actually a little sign over here in the right-hand corner that says members of the public, I believe, are prohibited from audio or video recording or photography in this facility. That is not a law. That's just a sign that anybody could have printed. If it was a law, they would have a statute under it.
Ma'am, how are you? Can I get your name and badge number, please?
He's recording, yeah, he's recording the thing that. There's a whole bunch of media, they have to record.
Is there a problem with us recording in the precinct? Because we have the law right here that says that we are specifically allowed to record in the precinct. So this is the sign that they're always referring to. What do you think holds more weight, ladies and gentlemen? This sign, members of the public are prohibited from audio video recording or photography inside this facility, or the actual law? Let's find out.
So you can't record inside the.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm gonna actually step out.
Can I
I'm
please
gonna
speak to a
actually step out.
supervisor?
First, you're gonna.
So it's interesting that they send 3 officers to deal with one person with a camera who, from everything that we can tell, is violating a department policy, but that policy is also in direct violation of New York City law based on what we've seen so far. And so it's kind of weird that you would send 3 officers to deal with one person with a camera. This officer could obviously just come out and ask Mr. Reyes to leave, but instead they send 3 people.
I have a law right here. You want to take a look
First,
at
you're gonna
it?
have to step out for me.
Please don't touch me.
I'm
Don't
gonna have
touch
to
me.
step out.
Don't touch
All
me.
right, so
Don't
step
touch.
out the
Don't
facility.
touch me.
All right, so
So at this point, they've already gone hands-on with Mr. Reyes. It looks like they're trying to push him out of this department lobby. I'm curious to see what happens.
step out the facility.
Don't touch me.
Sir, right now you're trespassing.
Don't touch me.
Okay, so at this point, they have said why they have gone hands-on with him at this point and are pushing him out of the lobby. The officer said, right now, you're trespassing. And that makes us wonder, what is trespassing in New York City? And can you trespass in public? Obviously, you can trespass on private property. We've all seen private property, no trespass signs. But generally, you can only be trespassed from a public place if you've engaged in some sort of disorderly conduct or another crime. The simple exercising of rights, like peacefully recording, can't be used as the basis for disorderly conduct or anything like that, and therefore shouldn't ever result in you being trespassed. In fact, New York City has a few different laws, and they have a section specifically dedicated to trespass in a public space, and that section reads, "A person who, regardless of his or her intent, enters or remains in or upon the premises which are at the time open to the public and does so with license or privilege unless he or she defies a lawful order not to enter or remain given to him or her by an owner of the premises or otherwise authorized person." So obviously, the officers here do have the authority to trespass people if they are otherwise committing a crime, such as disorderly conduct, something like that. But the key to this phrase here is that it has to be a lawful order, and the exercise of rights, such as recording in a public place, cannot be used as the basis for disorderly conduct, which would then be transferred into the ability for these officers to trespass Mr. Reyes from the premises. There's another subsection of that same law that says the license or privilege to enter or remain in a building which is only partly open to the public, which is what would apply here, is not a license or privilege to enter or remain in the part of the building which is not open to the public. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, behind those doors where it said authorized personnel only, something like that, Mr. Reyes would not be able to enter into that portion of the building, potentially, and record, because that is not designed to be open to the public. This lobby or foyer or vestibule, whatever you want to call this, is designed to be open to the public, and therefore he can only be trespassed from this part of the building if he's committing another crime, such as disorderly conduct.
Don't
Right now
touch
you're
me.
trespassing.
Hey,
Someone
get
needs to
off
step
of me.
out. All right,
Get
no
off of
problem.
me.
All right,
Get
now
off
we
of
can
me.
talk.
Get
Now
off
we
of
can
me.
talk outside.
Read the law that says I
All
have the
right,
right
we
to
can
do
talk
it.
outside. Now
You're a
we
law
can talk.
enforcement officer. Read the law. It fell over there.
You wanted to talk.
I'm going inside where I have the
You're
right
not
to
going
record.
inside.
I do. I have the right to record.
All right, you're trespassing.
I'm not.
I asked
Nope.
you to leave and you refused
I'm
to
not
leave.
trespassing.
Now you're
I'm not
Now you're not
trespassing.
because you're outside. So
No,
let's
I'm not
talk.
trespassing in a building that I pay
All right,
for
so
either.
let's talk.
There was
Why
no
not?
reason. Why'd you put your hands on me
Because I
that
asked
way?
you to leave and you refused to leave.
My paper's there. That
All right,
doesn't mean you can
I'll
put your
get
hands
your
on
paper.
me.
Do me a favor, grab his paper.
Let me speak to a supervisor.
All right, no.
Okay, so at this point, Mr. Reyes asked to talk to the supervisor, and as we've talked about other times on this channel, most states don't require that officers call the supervisor, but a lot of departments, and I'm sure the NYPD does as well, have a policy that if someone asks to speak to a supervisor, that you should bring one for them. And the whole thought process behind this is that cooler heads can prevail. Theoretically, a supervisor, someone in a position of more authority than a beat cop or somebody on the street, should have a better understanding of the law. Unfortunately, in this case, based on them sending 3 people and then a 4th and a 5th person coming out to assist in removing Mr. Reyes from the building, it doesn't appear like a supervisor in this precinct would have helped much in this situation anyway, at least up until this point.
We got one for you.
Let me speak to a
All
supervisor.
right, we got one for you.
It's ridiculous.
All right. It's ridiculous that you're not following.
Listen,
I asked him to leave.
You're with him?
He refused to leave.
You're documented? All right, just stop going closer to me.
Okay, so the officer keeps repeating, well, you're trespassing because I told you to leave and you refused to leave. Again, as we talked about previously, the only time that you can be trespassed is if you're given a lawful order. A lawful order to trespass someone from a public building has to come from the basis of a crime to start with.
That's fine.
are you
Stop
scared
going
of me or
closer.
something?
Can you
Stop.
go closer to me? Thank
Are you scared of me?
You keep coming closer. I keep
But are you
telling to
scared?
back up.
I'm going into my
Pay
building.
for this building.
Yeah, we pay for this building. That's right.
Back
We
up.
do pay for this building.
Back up. You want to talk to the supervisor? Just
We
back
pay
up
for this.
from me.
I'm waiting for the
Back up.
supervisor.
All right.
And my property's inside of this building
So
right
how's your
now.
property?
My
Stop
property's
coming-
inside of
stop
this building
coming
right now.
closer.
My property's
coming
inside of this
closer.
building.
I'm
I'm
asking-
getting my property.
Yo, step back.
I'm getting. Don't push me. Yo, what are you?
Okay, so at this point, this officer appears to have totally lost control. Mr. Reyes appears to obviously, escalate the situation a little bit because he is trying to exert his right and he's trying to go back into the building to get the copy of the law that he brought for these officers to use. But you can tell just from the look on this guy's face that he's not having any of it. And it now escalated from, going mildly hands-on to what I would call escalated shoving, right? This is something that a police officer normally would come in and break up if he saw 2 random people doing it on the street, which means we've now escalated to what any reasonable person would be considering to be use of force. And so that begs the question, when can police use force, such as pushing, shoving, any of those kinds of things in New York City? And the answer is the policy is kind of broad, but essentially it's to effect an arrest, prevent an escape, or defend a person or property from harm. And so in this case, the only thing that I can think of, because they haven't criminally trespassed Mr. Reyes, right? They simply asked him to leave, which is a trespass warning. And so here, the only thing I can think of is that this officer thinks he is protecting the property of the precinct. So while I don't agree with any of the pushing and shoving that's going on here, the officers, if this was taken to court, would most likely be found to be justified under qualified immunity because they're using that force in order to, quote unquote, protect the precinct. Whether or not this is the right outcome, it is the most likely outcome in this situation because even though this policy appears to be in complete violation of not only the First Amendment, but New York City and New York State laws, if they have a reasonable belief that their policy is lawful, police do have the ability to do things that would be illegal for other people. And so the other thing that we should note here is that since there wasn't a violation of the law to start with, there's not really anything to protect in the precinct here. But if he's operating under the belief that he has the right to protect the precinct from people recording, the most likely outcome here is that this use of force would be considered to be justified both by the police department and by any sort of criminal judge that would be looking at this.
What are you doing? Yeah. What are you pushing me for?
Yo, get out of
What are
my
you
face.
pushing me for?
Get out of my face.
No one's scared of you.
Get out of my face.
No one's scared
Get
of
out
you.
of my face. Get out of
No
my
one's
face.
scared of
Get
you.
out of my
No one-
face.
Don't touch me.
Here's your
Don't
paper.
touch me. That's not my paper.
where's your
That's
paper?
not my
All right,
paper.
then where's
It's
your
inside.
paper? Where inside?
It's inside. What you pushing on me for, man?
no,
What are you
please,
doing?
step away from me.
What are you
All right,
doing?
just
Don't
let-
touch
get
me.
back.
What are you pushing on me for, man?
All right,
What's
listen,
wrong with
if you
you?
come into the police facility,
No, what
you're
is
gonna be
wrong with you
arrested for
guys?
trespassing.
For trespass, I can't trespass in a public
I'm giving
area.
you a warning,
Don't
sir.
touch me. Give me my property.
All right, I'm
I
giving
want
you
my
a warning. All right,
property.
so step out, let go of the door.
My property's
All right,
inside
let
this
go of the
building.
door.
My property's inside this building.
All right, if you go through this-
My property's inside this building. Grab me my grab me my property. Grab me my property. You guys are out of control.
Okay, so before Mr. Reyes walked into this first set of doors, the officer did officially give him a trespass warning. Again, there's not really any justification for this under New York City or New York State law, given the laws that allow him to be recording. But at this point, when Mr. Reyes enters back in, they are likely to arrest him.
Look at the law. Look at the law. Look
You
at
got
the
cops,
law.
put your hands behind your back.
Look at the law. I'm not resisting.
All right, so put your hands.
And as we've been discussing throughout this process, that's exactly what was going to happen. That was kind of the point of why Mr. Reyes was here to begin with, because he had been arrested previously for quote unquote violation of this policy and wants to stand up against this silly policy by the NYPD, quite honestly, because it is in contradiction to New York City and New York State law. And as we discussed before, the arrest here isn't justified legally, at least, based on everything that we've talked about. But Sean, unlike many other auditors, did this, at least the second time, not the first time that he was arrested, as an exercise of rights under the law, specifically to see if they would arrest him, and they did. If you thought these officers were a bit out of hand for someone simply recording in a police precinct, you won't want to miss this video of what happens when a young man decides to flip off a cop on the side of the road.